This is my post-fight video for Alexander Povetkin vs Johann Duhaupas. If you want to hear my thoughts on the lead up to this fight and my thoughts on why this was a very, very, very bad night for boxing, please check out my video that was uploaded 5 or 6 hours prior to this one, which is something like BG on PEDs in heavyweight boxing. Let me start by saying this was an extremely bizarre fight to watch. Time and time again, we've watched boxing fights where it has transpired after the event that someone has been taking performance-enhancing drugs. Perhaps we've watched those fights back at a later date with the knowledge in hindsight that one of the two individuals was juiced up, for want of a better term. Time and time again, we've seen boxing fights where people have in the past been done for taking performance-enhancing drugs and are perhaps making a return to the ring under the guise of now being a clean athlete. Well, for me, this was a unique experience. Tonight we watched a boxing match where one of the two men in the ring was on performance-enhancing drugs. We watched a boxing match where one of the two men in the ring had been outed for failing a drug test quite literally hours before stepping into the ring. What we saw was one of the most dangerous heavyweight boxers on the planet, a guy who most of us would consider in their top 3 heavyweights, taking on someone who had less than half a day's notice for the fight. It was a very, very, very bizarre fight, and sitting there watching the fight with the knowledge that Povetkin was on performance-enhancing drugs, it made me look at it from a different perspective. It really did. Firstly, Povetkin, and let's take the judgmental morality side out of it. Povetkin looked superb in there. Physically, he looked in fantastic condition. He looked lean, he looked strong, he'd clearly got in excellent shape for this fight. You can make your own conclusions as to whether that was on merit or via performance-enhancing drugs. But let me start by saying that at the age of 37, Alexander Povetkin, for me, is at the best point of his career in terms of fitness and conditioning. Povetkin boxed extremely well in there. He put punches together fantastically. Some of the combinations he was throwing in there were deadly. What you saw him doing was throwing combinations with the same hand so effectively. So he would throw right cross to the head, right cross to the body, right uppercut in the middle, right jab. He'd throw combinations off the same punch. And typically in boxing combinations, you often see left hook, right hook. Here we saw Povetkin working one hand and, drilling combinations, 3-punch, 4-punch combinations with the same hand. Then we'd see him switch. He looked really dynamic in the ring. He was swapping from head to body seamlessly. He was swapping hands. He looked like he was carrying immense power with both hands. And he really, really looked pretty deadly in there. I actually thought Povetkin's speed was vastly increased in the ring tonight. Potentially, that's because he had lost weight in the lead up to the fight. It's obviously hard to look at any of these things and not be judgmental of it, given the performance-enhancing drug test. But at the age of 37, Povetkin appears suddenly to be a faster and more dynamic puncher who puts combinations together better than we've seen in the past. He was really, really, really explosive in there tonight. You've got to ask yourself, that Povetkin who fought Johann Duhaupas, imagine if he'd put in that performance against Vladimir Klitschko. Now, Vladimir Klitschko's style when they fought was very different, and Vladimir Klitschko's style was probably the textbook style to beat a smaller heavyweight like Alexander Povetkin. But if Povetkin had fought like that when he fought Vladimir Klitschko, I don't know if Vladimir would have been able to deal with him so easily. Povetkin looked like such a threat in there. He was come forward, he was aggressive, he was fast, he was high output, and the punches were absolutely flowing. They really were. Johann Duhaupas was not in this fight from start to finish. And you could just see every time Povetkin threw, despite being the substantially smaller man in there, both in terms of height and presumably in terms of weight, every time he threw, you could see there was bad intention behind those punches. And unfortunately, the fight ended in a particularly chilling knockout in the 6th round. A very, very, very heavy knockout for Johann Duhaupas. En route to that, Johann Duhaupas took several very, very heavy punches. I think particularly in the 4th and 5th rounds, Povetkin really seemed to be coming on strong. He seemed to be getting into his game and putting very, very big shots together. And Duhaupas was eating a hell of a lot of leather. I certainly hope he got paid well tonight. What was perhaps, for me, the most distasteful moment of the fight, apart from the fact that the fight actually happened in the first place, what was the most distasteful element is Alexander Povetkin, who coincidentally had been touching gloves with Johann Duhaupas at the end of every round, celebrated like a madman after winning the fight. He was doing all of this and up on the sides. The way Johann Duhaupas went down, I'll say it how I see it. My first thought was, is he alive? My second thought is he in good health? It was a heavy, heavy knockdown, and Povetkin didn't seem to have any concern for his opponent's condition. He went straight into celebration mode. Now, you could argue that even in the best of occasions that's distasteful, but when you've just tested positive for performance-enhancing drugs, you would assume that winning by a knockout of that fashion would be a particularly uncomfortable occasion. Because if any lasting damage was to occur to Johann Duhaupas, one would suggest that the intake of performance-enhancing drugs would have something to do with that. But for Povetkin, there was seemingly no concern for his opponent, no concern for his reputation, and no concern for decency, really, as he turned to the crowd and celebrated with, full aplomb, so we say. It's bizarre, because watching the fight, I have to say that I've never watched a fight with as much distaste, probably, as the fight I've seen tonight. It's really, really unpleasant. You've got a guy like Johann Duhaupas, who's a top 15 heavyweight. You've got a guy like Johann Duhaupas who's really worked his way to the top of the sport, or to this echelon of the sport. He got a hard-fought win against Robert Helenius on the road, and he's essentially sacrificed his position, his ranking, his record. He sold that because an opportunity came up at 10 hours for a big money fight with Alexander Povetkin. So that's upsetting. The fact that a guy like Povetkin is applauded and drawing a crowd despite his behaviour is very, very upsetting. And the fact that boxing allowed the fight to progress and allowed the fight to continue is pretty upsetting. And with all the bad stuff surrounding boxing at present, with the Nick Blackwell situation and the Mike Towell situation and all of the other bad stuff, I'm thinking Magomed Abdusalamov in the heavyweight division 2 or 3 years ago. A lot of bad stories out there. And surely, if we allow fights like this to continue, those stories are going to become increasingly frequent, as opposed to less and less, which we would all hope. So real distaste for this fight. What I would say, putting my distaste aside for 1 second, is, to my eye, and I watch a lot of heavyweight boxing, to my eye, Povetkin looked devastating in there. Devastating. I actually think it was one of the, if you take out the morality of the situation and take out the performance-enhancing drugs factor, which is very hard to do, it was probably one of the better performances of his career to date. He looked absolutely devastating in there. And based on that performance, aged 37 and juiced up to his eyeballs, Povetkin is an improved fighter. Povetkin is a quick, explosive, dynamic power puncher who's got a full range of punches, who goes to the body and head very well, and who still maintains that one-punch knockout power. I don't know what happens to Povetkin's career here. I don't know how it continues. I don't know who's going to volunteer to get in the ring with him next. But one thing I can say is the Alexander Povetkin in there tonight beats the vast majority of heavyweights. The vast majority of heavyweights. There's a lot of money behind him, and I'm intrigued to see how boxing will deal with this problem. Let me know your thoughts, people. Give me your take on the fight. Give me your take on the politics behind it. If you've enjoyed the video, please hit the thumbs up button. And if you're new to the channel, please take the time to subscribe so you can check out all of my other stuff. My social media links are in the description. I've got a link to my Facebook page if anyone wants to add me as a friend there. Cheers, guys.